United States, most of my research has been around developing and testing interventions for women with abusive partners and trying to improve the community response to women with abusive partners. So that's what I do with my research. But I also have run my own program providing advocacy for women after they have been abused. And I've worked with a lot of our nonprofit domestic violence victim service programs for many years. And that's why I especially appreciate and understand the incredible work that you're doing. And that there's a big difference between research and program evaluation. So when Zvi asked us to identify current controversies that we could write chapters about for this book and talk about, I thought about some of the work that I've been doing in the United States and abroad with domestic violence victim service programs around how to evaluate the impact of their work on the women who come use their services. Because, and I'll be curious to hear if this is true in Israel as well, in the United States, over the last 10 years, there's been incredible pressure from our funders to start evaluating not just how many women we work with, how many groups we offer, whether they're satisfied, but to start looking at what's the outcomes of the work, what's the impact of your work on women. Are you getting that? I'm seeing some nods. Yes? Okay. So let me tell you, in the United States, the problem with this has been so many of our funders are starting to demand this, but they're giving us no money to do it. Okay, this is not an invitation to bring in researchers or evaluators. This is an expectation that the programs will, on an ongoing basis, evaluate their impact. Well, many people doing this work don't know how to do program evaluation, right? They don't like numbers, they like people, right? They want to be out, and I hear this a lot. Every time I fill out a form, it's time I'm taking away from a woman. And so there's little time in our programs to do this work. There's little sense of expertise. There's even a debate about what are the appropriate outcomes to use. What should our outcomes be with this work? What are the safety and confidentiality concerns? Many of us work with women who are in crisis. Okay? This is not a time to ask a woman, could you fill out this form for me? Okay? Tell me how effective my services have been. It's inappropriate, it would be insensitive. Grantees are worried that the funders will start using their findings against them and start taking money away or pitting one organization against another. So for all of these reasons, a lot of the domestic violence programs feel like this is a waste of time, taking them away from the important work that they're doing. On the other hand, because this is a controversy, I have not yet met anyone doing this work who doesn't really care about finding out whether what they're doing is effective for women. Okay? All advocates care about wanting to do the best work that they can do, wanting to find out what can we do better, what do women need that they're not getting from us. So the interest is there. The interest to always be improving our services is there. We can use positive findings to keep staff excited about this work. Goodness knows we don't do it for the money. Okay? We do it because we care. We'd like to know that we're making a positive impact. And maybe the findings can be used to get more funding, to educate the public about the great work that's being done. So let me talk for a second about when we first started talking about this in the United States, we had to decide what are the outcomes for domestic violence victim service programs. Because so many people think of outcomes in terms of changing people's behavior. So we had funders coming in and saying, so how are you changing women's behavior? Are you helping them make better relationship choices? Are you helping them leave the relationship? Are you making it so that they never get abused again? Well, of course, that's not the work that we do. Okay, those are very victim-blaming outcomes. They make assumptions about women that we know are not true. We know that when women leave the relationship, often the abuse gets even worse. And that for many women, they want to stay in the relationship. They simply want the violence to end. Okay. We know that they're not responsible for the abuse occurring, and we have all worked with a woman who has done everything in her power to stay safe. She's done everything she possibly could, and she's still going to be abused again. Okay, so those are not our outcomes. The other problem that we have is every woman who comes to us comes with different life circumstance, different needs, different issues. We see some women for a very short period of time. We sometimes may only talk to a woman for an hour. We may not know if we're going to see her again. So we have these different lengths of time that we work with women, and our outcomes will differ based on that. So these are some of the issues that we were struggling with when we first in the United States started talking, so what are our outcomes? What should we be looking at with our services? So let me just pause for a minute and say what an outcome is, because when I started doing this work, I noticed a lot of people weren't even sure what that means for us with our programs. What is an outcome? We're used to counting how many women we work with. We're used to counting what we do, how often we do it, and whether women are satisfied. This goes beyond that. An outcome is the change that we're trying to help make happen. Why do we do this work? What's the change we're hoping to have occur? An outcome can be a change in knowledge. It can be a change in attitude, skill, behavior, expectation, emotional status, or life circumstance, tied to the service being provided. So once we started thinking more broadly about outcomes, then when I would say to people doing this work, how do you think you sometimes change a woman's knowledge? All of the hands would go up. We change women's knowledge all the time. We help them understand dynamics of domestic violence, where they can go for help, what their rights are, what services are available. Okay. There's a lot of change in knowledge that our programs are trying to have happen. We change attitudes. We get women who come to our services who say, maybe I should have done this differently. I shouldn't have upset him, maybe this is my fault. And we help her rethink that and see that she's not to blame for what happened to her. We sometimes help women develop new skills. They may need skills with getting a job or dealing with the court system. We do sometimes help women change behaviors if they come wanting to change a particular behavior. So maybe they have issues with drug abuse. Maybe they feel like they need to be better parents. Those are behaviors that if they identify that as an issue, we can help them with. We can change women's expectations. And again, I don't know how this would play out in Israel, but in the United States, women have sometimes wrong expectations about what will happen with the court system. They think that if the guy is arrested, he might go to jail. In the United States, that's very unlikely to happen. Okay? So we have to lower her expectations. For other women, though, we have to raise their expectations. We get immigrant women, for example, from other countries who may not speak English well, and they don't know the customs and the laws, and their batterer has told them, there's no law against this. I can do anything I want to you. So then we educate them about the truth behind that and raise their expectations that they do have options, they do have choices. We sometimes help women change their life circumstance. They may want to move, they may want to go back to school, they may want to get a job. So these are all of the types of outcomes And I see a lot of nodding here, so I believe that these are similar outcomes for many of you. But what's different, I think, is that each woman comes to us wanting her own outcome, right? So we can't say this is the outcome for everybody. And that really left us struggling with, so how do we do outcome evaluation if everyone has a different outcome? So I've been meeting with people doing this work for over 10 years now. We've had lots of discussions around what are the outcomes, how do we make sure we individualize the outcomes for each woman, and what about we have different programs in different size programs, people doing different things. So after a lot of discussion, we realized that regardless of program size or capacity or even the type of service being provided, most domestic violence victim service programs share the following goals of enhancing justice for women. Not just legal justice, but economic justice, social justice. Autonomy, reestablishing women's right to self-determination, which has often been taken away from her as part of the violence. Restoration. We do so much with women's emotional well-being. We do so much in helping them feel less despair, feel more hopeful, feel better about themselves, feel that maybe life can get better. And then, of course, safety, enhancing psychological and physical safety. So we came to a lot of agreement that at least we can agree that those are our overall goals, and we can try to develop outcomes within those goals. Now, in the US, when I talk with people about this, in English, this is a great acronym for JARS, as you see the picture of JARS up here. And this acronym for JARS helps people who speak English remember these things. This probably makes no sense in Hebrew at all. So I'm going to skip right by that. So let me just tell you that in the chapter, we will all be writing chapters for this book, and what I'm wanting to talk about in this chapter is lay out these controversies, in part because I've been trying to educate the funders, not just our programs, but the people with the money, about what these issues are, okay? That they can't come to us and just say, start evaluating your work with no money, no expertise, no tools, just do it on top of everything else that you're doing. Okay, so I want to lay out what's the controversy, why are some domestic violence programs not evaluating their work now, and what's needed in order to have an evaluation make sense. And I want to try to stress that programs should be determining their own outcomes. We don't need other people to say, this is the outcome that you should be looking at, especially if it's not an outcome that is reasonable or makes sense for any of us doing the work. And then I want to lay out some of the work that's been done internationally around this issue over the last 10 years, because I hope that we don't all have to keep reinventing the wheel and doing all of this from scratch if we can help it. I was working for a while a few years ago with domestic violence programs in Scotland, Ireland, and Portugal. They all got money from the European Union. This was a pot of money that they'll give to countries collaborating with each other to develop something that might be useful to many countries in Europe. So Scotland, Ireland, and Portugal were all struggling with this same issue, but in different ways. In Scotland, they were already being told that they had to start doing outcome evaluation. Ireland felt like it was probably coming in the next couple of years, and they wanted to be ahead of it. And Portugal was they were just developing some services, and they were not experiencing this yet. But again, there's a sense, even if it's not happening in a country, there's a sense that it's coming, and that we don't want to have other people making the decisions around this. We want to be ahead of what's happening. So what I'll talk about in there is this was a 2-year process that all of these were wonderful feminist women doing great work in their countries, and they wanted their evaluations to reflect women's priorities. They didn't want evaluations to be, what do our staff think is important? What will our funders think is important? They wanted to go to the women that they were working with. So we had many discussions with women who were using their services and said to them, what would you define as success? What do you think should be a sign of success? And interestingly, across all 3 countries, we got very similar responses. Okay? That women did want knowledge about what was available to them in their communities. What are my legal rights? Okay? How do I get more support? How do I help my family understand what I'm going through? Okay. Women also needed the help around the emotional issues that they were dealing with. They wanted information around safety and help with safety. So we were hearing the very same outcomes across these countries. And then we had the next complicated issue of how do we get that information from women without it being an extra burden for them. We didn't want to create a 10-page questionnaire that we would hand out to every woman who came into our services. We had to deal with issues of, if this would be a written survey, what about women who were illiterate? What about women who had different languages? How many languages would we have to translate these surveys into? What about women with disabilities who would have a difficult time filling out a form? So should it be a written form? Should it be a verbal interaction with women? And very importantly, when do you even ask women about outcomes? Because we don't always know when we're done working with her, right? Women don't come to us and say, I'll be working with you for 3 months. We wish. It depends. And sometimes we think she's coming back and she's not. Sometimes in shelters, we think she's staying and she's gone. So we worked out many of these issues, and then we did a pilot study. In each of these countries, we got programs to volunteer to use the surveys that were created, and we heard from the staff and from the women using the services how they felt about it. Was it easy? Did it make sense? Was it important information to get? And then from that, we did create these tools, these surveys, that we're trying to make widely available, but we're still also trying to find out how wide are they relevant to people. So would they be relevant in Israel, or would you come up with something completely different? You know, there are some countries that they have looked at it, people in countries who've looked at this and said, this is great, I'm going to use something similar. Others are saying, this part makes sense, we would have to make these changes. And so that's part of the exciting part of this process, is at least talking together about what would make sense and how do we do this so that we have control of the process. So I will be including all of that. And if anyone wants any of these tools, I will be giving them all to Zvi, and he said that he would make sure that he sent them out to anyone who was interested. We've also been doing other similar work in the United States around these issues that I'll be bringing in, and I'll just talk about then what we learned from these efforts and what our next steps are. So that's my controversy, and I'm very interested to hear if this is at all relevant in Israel. So I'm going to end now and take questions.